Pietrek waves back, then turns and carries the canisters into the darkness. The dry gullet of the forlorn generator took in the overwhelming spills of gasoline as light barely crept past blind rims at the ends of the earth, whose in its own darkness of the woods coveted any side of it. As did the moon rise, so did the plots of every living creature. Glints revealed themselves behind the trees from the full moon's light cracking through the leafy barriers as hundreds of stones glittered in and out of an existence judged by another living realness in them, and through that light, just out of hand's reach. The shadows outside the hideout were riddled with plots and intrigues. A metal clank so faint it could be mistaken for a stick snapping was overthrown by the wails of an unaccounted beast a few kilometers past one of the wood's stump-tight strongholds none could break through, and none would, as it gurgled and was eaten by a second unknown force. The stranger listened in a tense standoff between the workbench and oven as sounds died out and were replaced by increasingly delirious whispers. All those who lived here now partook in the vile rule of the jungle they once called their harvests, and their family futures, and all that worked in the fields and fished the locks. It was where that was industrial and shone an alabaster finish now lay ruined under the vines of the necropolis that heralded the plague and the wordless sermons of the voices that fallen men and women perplexed to, and soon turned to primeval bloodlust and digging. The stranger then remembered a wrongness in his mouth when he clenched his teeth at the hostile takeover he previously orchestrated over that man and his tent. He took his tongue and swabbed over his muddy teeth and followed past the incisors and licked until he reached his first premolar, and the tongue dipped deep into a newly formed crater. He was missing a tooth. His brain rewired something deep inside and he began to grow scared. All he knew was that he needed to get home and return to his apartment. He needed to sleep badly. He continued inspecting the missing tooth extensively as though it could grow back somehow. He focused. He still needed to trade for a watch. He had forgotten a second time too far gone in many senses of the word, and many he kept locked away. The man began patrolling the hideout. He crossed through the bathroom and reached the front door. He stood and listened, then turned and slowly walked through the living room and into the dilapidated farm kitchen. He could not get rid of the haunting sending an abordage to his mind. If it were a sound mind, he could focus and take on the eye staring at him. Thumping could be heard, but no one else was in the house. But he listened to it, thinking there was one. A breeze swept past the barricaded windows, and an icy aurora made his hair stiff. The false footsteps make noise too. In another room, a large clash of some heavy tool met the cold wood in the front door. The lights flickered in response as a second impact was made thereafter. The stranger panicked and readied himself, and when he looked up, he saw a bony and skin-tight hand clasped around the glassless window sill through the barricade in front of him. A single sweat-red eye stared back, watching still as stagnant water. The stranger raises his pistol and fires. With the dim light, he could see the flesh was pierced, but the clandestine form was gone before he could blink. It had simply disappeared from his peripheral. Messy footsteps could be heard scuttling away from the door, that which bruised and cursed at the second intruder. No sound wept from the night as though it were covering its ears from the gunfire. Then they began shouting, hooting, hollering, a violent vehement. He heard low-pitched shouting from many voices around the house, and he heard shouting a short way towards the rooted bunker from which he arrived from, and he heard shouting that trailed past those same towering rocks earlier afternoon, and he heard shouting and drooling spits of the green people under some ethereal hypnosis of Anushka, and he heard heads baying wildly on the trees to both north and west, and he heard the clobbering of staff branches on the well and behind the generator shed, and behind plastered amongst many dirt hives tilled by hundreds of somnolent footsteps. As if part of a trance had haywired then, or a puppeteer's string got caught with one another, the naked men and women may have regained a fleeting memory. They stopped shouting. They trotted, and made low bellows while the stranger circles his feet around the room, turning his head wildly as does the spot one. The vessels of the oven begin pulsating violently like a heartbeat, and they move their shadows amongst the lamplight into the holes across the ceiling. All at once, rocks, sticks, dirt, and debris begin rapidly pelting the house. The walls moved from the impacts and the front door shook harder. He saw a mouth covered in glass shards and full of broken teeth dart past the second one of the window barricades. The stranger sprang towards the locked and battered front door, which had a stack of boards laying right next to it. Hammer in hand, he begins frantically striking a nail into the left side of the board as grunts filled with phlegm echo across the perimeter. His sweaty gloves slip from the board as he grabs again and starts to hammer a second nail. Amongst the barrage of dirt and stones and shit, a fist punches through and breaks a small lubricated side of the door, wet with the elements, grabbing around the edges. He slams the hammer multiple times into the grimed hand until it retracts with a whelp. He finishes the board and slams another one on the lower side as he hears a faint scooping. A lucky, wet stone barrels past an opening to the window barricade and bounces the wall next to him. The shouts increase once again, and the noises shoot the remaining nerves the stranger had. He feels physical pain jolt his back when he leaps up, hobbles, and pushes over a gas canister by one of the windows in the living room, which begins leaking. He sees tree branches ricochet against that window with faint human forms running around the dark, reveling with their large antler-like hats of mud and sticks. As he moved to one of the two windows, he heard a crash. A heavy gas canister is thrown and breaches through the barricade and all its boards, creating a gaping hole. Rocks flood into the room. They had filled it up to give it more potency. Immediately, a savage came into view with a staff clasped by two hands. She swings it at one of the remaining broken boards until it yanks off with the last nail. Then her chest twitches as a loud bullet splits through and she falls to the ground. In response to this, the savages begin to scream like nuclear alarms and stop their pelting. The stranger saw three more run past the tree line and towards the open barricade as the front door begins receiving blows from a lumbering branch once more. He turns his back and runs out of the room, slamming the door shut and locked, then tips over the couch with all of its might. The flames of his personal lantern slide around like slush. Savages of unknown quantities fill the room inside. One stepped onto the larger rocks and fell over, and ignorant of the splinters, it got up and rose again. One of the boards of the west door, which led outside, was beginning to let loose as kicks and shoulder ramming began to lay siege on it. The front door stood like a stone oven with the soft and wet planks. In an instant, the door with the couch began taking blows as well. He saw a hand stick through the window's boards next to him, and he pulls it and he begins beating it with his glass shard, board and nails, not letting it go while the savage outside screams his awful screams and moans for help from the others, which he gets none of. He sees a staff stab through the same opening, missing his grasping hand each time. The stranger let go of the arm and grabs the staff quickly. It gives little resistance as the injured man flees into the woods howling. He was terrified of how many things he brought attention to just from his first gunshot. The banging of the house made his thoughts inaudible to him. The lock to the west door broke open with a savage stepping in, staff in hand. The stranger throws his board with nails at the pursuer, but it bounces off his slimy thigh with little thought to the bleeding. They begin to both run towards each other and begin clashing staffs. The savage is stronger though, and the stranger resorts to blocking after 4 strikes. He sees a second walking to the door, and he jumps past as the first savage slams his heavy branch into the floorboards, cracking the wet wood. The stranger pulls his knife out and kicks the shin of the recovering savage, stumbling him. He begins violently thrashing the muscle by its collarbone, then aims correctly and slashes the neck. The man on the floor begins convulsing as the stranger shoves his shoulder at the door and smashes the arm of the second savage in between as the fiend pushes back with medium succession. He meets his gaze with the inner arm, which is moving less erratically than the hand, and he stabs his knife through. The savage screams, yet still tries to push through. The stranger puts his back against the door and drags the choking savage against it and props him next to the door. With a great shove outside, the arm of the second savage slinks out of the door with a knife still stuck through the muscle. The knife was outside now, but the stranger focused on shutting the door, pushing the half-dead savage against it, and picked up his board with nails next to him. He stomps his neck and catches his breath as the front door's banging noises hurt his senses. His heart begins to palpitate. He heard wood splitting in the rooms he could not see and the hooting and flailing lunges of numerous entities outside. He picks up the loose board and adds another large nail into it with 2 hits. As he does, he hears bodies meshing together. He turns right, and through the bathroom, 3 savages shove themselves through the now broken barricade. One hits his chest on top of the leaking gas canister. Those outside the front door give up and run to the weaker door and begin their siege behind him. The door would not hold. He limps into the bathroom as his body tires. He swings back his precious lantern and tosses it onto the floor by the window. The 2 savages, a man and a woman, watch it pass them with drooling faces as it lands next to the third. The lantern breaks from the impact and the light meets the gasoline. The savage on the ground ignites and begins a long, crescendoous howl. The other 2 savages are faster and escape the flames. They run headstrong away from their companion towards the stranger as he tries to close the door, but one headbutts underneath, flinging the door open as it bounces off the bathtub. He grabs his legs and begins to pull the stranger closer to the flames, whether they realize that or not. The woman slams her staff into the stranger's ribcage as he clings one hand to the doorframe while swinging his club wildly. The impact causes him to let go, and he is pulled into the room. His arms meet the staff a second time as he blocks, and the man mounts him and punches directly into his blocking left forearm. The muscle twitches and pain searches and destroys all hope amongst his body. His arms bleed profusely, and his coat grows hot. In a growing sense of confusion, the savage looks at his hand, which part of it begins to burn from a sensational bile. The stranger takes his chance and knocks his head clean, and parts of his skin peel off from the nails and glass shards while his crown of branches crumble on top of the stranger's stomach. With his injured hand, he pulls the body of the stunned savage to him, and it receives the blow from his equally mindless partner under that same hypnotic violence. The stranger strangles his body to move like a cornered animal, and his upper torso lifts and pushes the savage close enough for his feet to light on fire, which spreads like a disease amongst the sweat and infectious pus colonies on its back. He becomes unconscious. The female savage backs away from the new flames, stamping the staff on the ground repeatedly as a coping mechanism, as the stranger pushes the crazed savage off himself with all his remaining strength. Behind him, he can barely spot more shadows in another room, reflecting the lamplight. He breathed heavily and a sharp stabbing feeling took him back down. He tried to get up. The savage in the room with him began reaching for scrap and broken pieces of wood and stone from the workbench and the floor and began to throw them at him. Then she begins to calm and grabs the staff again, approaching him while her feet hiss at the hot floor beneath her. The stranger kicks his right leg hard off the burning savage and spins his body, and puts as much force as he can and kicks the side of her shins, but she falls forward and onto him. Upon contacting the blood on his arm and chest, she begins to scream. The blood burns her skin as she crawls off of him and backs away. The fire reaches her right arm as she begins to grow louder and hits her arm in an illogical attempt to put it out, to no avail. He digs in his pocket with his weakened arm for the pistol as his other arm is pinned underneath him. That's when a shadow looms over the stranger. He turns and sees a new savage towering over him. Infected yellow eyes stared back at him with mindless curiosity. His sweat gleams by the fires like a golden trophy, and after a handful of seconds he takes a step and is shot in the head. The eyes of a second new savage in the room open to huge proportions as it shrieks in fear, its larger eyes contracting its muddy body. All the stranger could hear was it running away. He lay against the body, barely able to move, and watched in agony the woman still trying to put the fire out, which was now covering her entirely. She sat against the wall in defeat, stared into the air, and let out a shrill that did not end. The pain festered in her. The stranger raises his pistol and fires. As seconds became minutes again, he heard the remaining savages outside holler and stamp their sticks. Then, one by one, they cower back into the forest and away from the moonlight. They found it not worth continuing. If they still knew what loss was, they felt it there and they felt it in them. The stranger morbidly watched the two dead savages as their bodies charged from the flames, too beaten up to even move his head. The smoky stench filled the room as the fire slowly died out. His arm was still bleeding, and his vision buckled as he ate 2 of the pills he had gotten weeks ago. They were dirty, but he swallowed them anyway. It was cold outside, and a chill hand seeped into the house. Whether there were strong barricades or not, the hideout itself has been in disrepair for as long as the previous residents' glimmer of existence. He looked at his blood that leaked into his coat arm. Within him, it felt normal, but when exposed to the elements, it felt hot to the touch, and he could hear a tiny sizzle make its mark on the fabric. Perhaps it was that which caused such agonizing pain to the 2 savages that grabbed him. It began to feel like boiling. The adrenaline wore off its entirety, and the pain flooded in gallops. His limp body sat there, and the broken rib cage along with his deepening arm wound and rawned blood was excruciating. He could not manage the pain through groans, shouts, a cry for help, a scream. He was a mute patient who had woken up during surgery, and further trauma stressed his brain to another point of no return. His consciousness was leaving him, and he wanted it so badly. But he would die from the blood loss of his arm or some other internal bleeding if he did not act. He had to move. It was still night. Only the 3rd hour was upon his trial of agony. He dragged himself over to the bodies. At least one rib was far gone, and it wouldn't heal right, especially if accelerated. His trinkets and coat tears clung to the splinters of the soggy floor, which turned dry as he pulled closer. He kept denying his part in the spreading infection, even though he admitted it within him. He opened his coat arm and gazed in a tired panic when he saw more than a wound. His eyes shut its hinges swiftly, and he plunged the wounded side of his left arm into the charring flesh of the male savage in front of him, which lumped against the workbench. The burning corpse burned his own flesh, and his blood even further as it ate away at the shoulder. Teeth clenched to nearly a shattering point of pressure, but he stuck to it for another few minutes and pressed into the flesh. Further, as the savage's body began to cool, at last he let go of his left arm with his other and rolled back from exhaustion, which his broken rib did not take kindly to, and delivered a small stab at the muscle to the skin of his chest. His mind groaned. Most of the hideout entrances were now exposed, and if there was any rustling outside, he could not sense them. His body was raw, his blood was raw. The man could not eat or drink, and didn't need to, and no matter how much he wanted to, he couldn't sleep. He was a cancer evolving in wrong ways, and the cells ached his back at alarming levels of pain as he reached out with his right arm, the cold blackened staff of the female savage, which escaped the fires. He leaned into it to help him stand, and he eventually did, and his torso felt the cold breeze. The side of his armpit gushed into more burning, and he immediately felt it. Something had stabbed it during his fight, yet it had miraculously not reached close enough to all of his arteries. He fell onto the workbench, then without getting up, he dug the drawers and took a lockpick out. Then he closed them with a rigid agitation and pushed himself up. He opened the hinges of the top and pulled out a bandage. He fell back onto the bench as it closed and began wrapping his left arm. Then he pulled down his scarf. His teeth met at the end of the thick lockpick, and he began to gnaw. It broke and fell at the bottom of his maw, and he spat it out onto the table. His right arm blindly found another handle, and he opened another drawer and began digging. His glove touched something soft and thin and bundled, and together he pulled it out. It was a long piece of string. He tied it to the lockpick, and then bent his body leftward into the burnt arm and uncomfortably reached his right side. He forced his left arm to work. The thick end of the lockpick pulled 2 armpit hairs away at its first sew into the flesh. A second, slower puncture through the skin came through, and the dirty strain followed. His peach and moldy green skin juxtaposed the red pit near his vitals. His ear was better exposed to whatever was out there, and there was something walking outside. He got quieter and endured the burning and aching and sharp stings in his armpit as he finished the grueling job. He shouldn't have drank the alcohol days ago. He turned his back and laid on the workbench like an elderly man on a rocking chair fighting for his last breath. His bottom sat on top of the male savage. He listened and put his pistol on the table. 4 shots left. His breathing grew heavy from both his physical agony and the thing outside taking its time inspecting the left door. The stranger heard scratching as it attempts to open the door, but the savage corpse was blocking it. It left and began circling the rest of the left side of the house towards the generator, behind him. In the way the stranger lay, his eyes could barely look up past the window. Every well-placed step brought it closer to the windowsill until it was, and a huff of wet mist exhausted from its mouth. All the stranger saw was that mist, and stood still as a stake board. The unknown creature stood there for a while and sniffed around. It was a dog. He assumed it was a small dog, since he couldn't see past the windowsill or the top of it, so he was not sure how big it was, really, nor how dangerous it was. But his hand was on top of the pistol. At long last, the dog began walking again. When it walked near the window, where the gas canister had broken through, the canine bit down, and a weak gasp was heard as it began pulling flesh and entrails off. It was silent as it ate. Then it began to pull again. It pulled the entire body as the stranger heard more shocked gasps outside, which turned to helpless groans. They got quieter as those groans led back into the woods.